The moon of Lizera 7 was a cold, desolate place. Its gray surface stretched endlessly under a dim red sun, broken only by jagged cliffs and craters left behind by ancient impacts. Humanity had chosen this barren rock as its first deep space colony, a desperate gamble to escape Earth's overpopulation and dwindling resources. But survival here was anything but easy. Kale sat cross-legged on the icy metal floor of the communication hub, his breath fogging up inside his helmet. He tapped absently at the console before him, its blinking lights casting faint shadows across his face. The equipment was old, salvaged from decommissioned ships back on Earth, and prone to glitches. Tonight, though, something felt different. Something wasn't right. Still nothing. Came a voice from behind him. It belonged to Captain Lyra Voss, the leader of the colony. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Her presence carried authority, but there was also exhaustion etched into her features. Like everyone else, she hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Nope," Kale replied without looking up. "Just static and dead air." His tone was casual, almost dismissive, but his fingers moved with precision over the controls. At 24, he was one of the youngest engineers on the team, yet no one doubted his skill. When it came to fixing things, Kale had a knack for turning chaos into order. Lyra sighed and walked closer. "We can't afford to waste more time on this. Resources are running low, and morale's even lower if we don't get help soon." She trailed off, letting the unspoken consequences hang heavy in the air. Kale nodded but didn't respond immediately. Instead, he adjusted the frequency dials again, narrowing the range slightly. And then, he froze. Amidst the endless static, a faint sound emerged. Faint, distorted, but unmistakably artificial. It was a signal. "What is that?" Lyra asked sharply, stepping forward. I don't know." Kale frowned, leaning closer to the screen. The signal repeated itself every few seconds, a series of tones followed by bursts of garbled noise. Then, suddenly, words began to form. Not in English, not in any human language, but somehow intelligible all the same. "Help us," it said over and over again. "Find us." The room fell silent except for the eerie echo of the plea. Kale glanced at Lyra, whose expression mirrored his own mix of awe and unease. "Where's it coming from?" she demanded after a moment. He worked quickly, tracing the signal's origin through the outdated navigation system. After several tense minutes, the coordinates appeared on the display. They pointed far beyond human space, to a region of the galaxy marked as uncharted and dangerous. "This could be our chance," Kale said quietly, his voice tinged with both excitement and dread. "Whoever sent this, they might have what we need to survive. Or they could be hostile." Lyra countered sternly. "We don't know who or what we're dealing with." Kale hesitated. He knew she was right. Venturing out there would mean risking everything, their lives, their colony, the fragile hope keeping them alive. Yet the alternative was staying here, waiting for supplies to run dry and dreams to die. "We'll never know unless we try," he finally said, meeting her gaze. There was determination in his eyes now, cutting through the weariness. For the first time in months, he felt like he had purpose. Lyra studied him for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. "All right, but we do this carefully. Gather a small crew, people you trust, and prepare the eclipse. This isn't just about curiosity, Kale. It's about survival." As she turned to leave, Kale stared back at the blinking console. The signal continued to repeat, growing louder in his mind. "Help us. Find us." Somewhere out there, someone, or something, was calling for aid, and whether it led to salvation or doom, Kale couldn't ignore it. The decision to leave Lizera 7 wasn't made lightly. For days, arguments echoed through the colony's cramped meeting hall. Some settlers supported Cal's plan, seeing it as humanity's last hope. Others called it reckless, a suicide mission that would waste precious resources and manpower. But in the end, Captain Lyra Voss cast the deciding vote. She trusted Cal's instincts, even if she didn't fully share his optimism. "You're sure about this?" Lyra asked him one final time as they stood outside the Eclipse, their only functioning starship. The vessel was old, patched together from salvaged parts, but it had carried them safely so far. Still, venturing into uncharted space was a gamble no one could guarantee. "As sure as I can be," Cal replied, adjusting the strap of his toolkit slung over his shoulder. His confidence masked the gnawing doubt in his stomach. This was no ordinary mission. It was a leap into the great unknown. Joining them were 3 others, each chosen for their unique skills. Zinara, the xenobiologist, brought knowledge of alien life forms, though her expertise had never been tested beyond theory. Rook, a grizzled ex-soldier with scars, both visible and invisible, provided brute strength and tactical experience. And Tessa, the youngest of the group, carried her creation. Echo, an experimental AI designed to assist with navigation and data analysis. Though still in its infancy, Echo showed flashes of personality that unsettled some but fascinated Tessa. As the crew boarded the Eclipse, the colonists gathered to watch. Some cheered, clutching onto fragile hope. Others muttered warnings or turned away entirely. The weight of expectation pressed heavily on the team, but none more than Cal. He'd convinced everyone this was worth trying, and now he had to prove it. Inside the ship, the atmosphere shifted. Excitement gave way to tension as the engines roared to life. The Eclipse shuddered briefly before lifting off, leaving behind the gray desolation of Lizera 7. Through the viewport, Cal watched the colony shrink until it disappeared entirely, swallowed by the vastness of space. "Coordinates set," Tessa announced, her fingers flying across the console. Echo chimed softly in agreement, projecting a holographic map of their route. "Estimated travel time: 3 weeks. 3 weeks of boredom, you mean?" Rook grumbled, leaning back in his seat. His tone was dismissive, but his eyes betrayed unease. Space travel always made people uneasy, especially when heading somewhere unexplored. Zinara ignored him, poring over notes on potential alien species they might encounter. "If we're lucky, whoever sent that signal will welcome us with open arms, or whatever passes for arms where they come from. And if we're not lucky," Rook shot back. "We'll deal with it," Lyra interjected firmly. Her voice left no room for argument. "Right now, our priority is staying focused. We don't know what's out there, but we do know what happens if we fail." Cal nodded silently, staring at the blinking dot on the map representing their destination. 3 weeks felt like an eternity, but every second counted. Back on Lizera 7, time was running out. As the days passed, routine settled in. Meals were eaten in shifts, repairs were made to keep the ship running smoothly, and conversations grew quieter. Yet beneath the surface, anticipation simmered. Each jump through hyperspace brought them closer to answers and dangers they couldn't predict. On the 10th day, something unexpected happened. Echo detected faint energy readings nearby, an anomaly drifting just off their path. Curiosity got the better of them, and Lyra ordered a detour. What they found chilled them to the bone. A massive derelict ship floated silently against the backdrop of stars. Its design defied logic. Organic curves blended seamlessly with metallic structures, glowing faintly with bioluminescent patterns. It looked less like a machine and more like a living organism frozen mid-motion. "This doesn't feel right," Rook muttered, gripping his weapon tightly. "It's incredible," Zinara breathed, already pulling up scans. "I've never seen anything like it." Cal stepped forward, his heart pounding. Whoever sent that signal, maybe this is part of it. Whether it was a clue or a trap, they wouldn't know until they went inside. Steeling themselves, the crew prepared to board the mysterious vessel. Whatever secrets it held, one thing was certain: their journey had only begun. The airlock hissed open, and the crew of the Eclipse stepped cautiously into the derelict alien ship. The interior was unlike anything they had ever seen. walls that pulsed faintly, as if alive, and floors that shifted slightly underfoot. Strange symbols glowed softly along the curved surfaces, casting an eerie blue light throughout the corridors. It felt less like stepping onto a spacecraft, and more like entering the body of some colossal, sleeping creature. "This place gives me the creeps," Rook muttered, gripping his weapon tightly. His eyes darted around, scanning for threats. "Feels like it's watching us." "Maybe it is," Zenara replied, her voice hushed with awe. She ran her gloved hand over one of the glowing symbols, her scientist's curiosity overpowering her fear. "Look at this design. It's incredible. Half organic, half mechanical. Like nothing in our databases." Kale led the way, his flashlight cutting through the dimness. Every step echoed unnaturally, as though the ship itself were responding to their presence. Tessa stayed close behind him, Echo's holographic interface flickering uncertainly beside her. Even the AI seemed uneasy here, its usual chirps and beeps replaced by hesitant tones. "Echo, can you analyze these symbols?" Kale asked, pointing his light at a cluster of markings on the wall. "Processing," Echo replied after a pause. Its voice sounded strained, almost hesitant. "Symbols appear to be linguistic, but structure is unfamiliar, unable to decode fully." Lyra frowned, keeping her gaze fixed ahead. "Stay alert. If this ship sent the signal, there might still be someone, or something, on board." As they moved deeper into the vessel, signs of destruction became evident. Panels hung loose from the walls, sparking faintly. Dark scorch marks marred the otherwise smooth surfaces, evidence of a violent battle long past. In one corridor, they found what looked like remnants of alien bodies, twisted forms fused with metallic fragments, frozen in grotesque poses. "What happened here?" Tessa whispered, her face pale beneath her helmet. "No idea," Lyra said grimly. "But whatever it wasn't friendly." They eventually reached what appeared to be the ship's central chamber. The room was massive, its ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stood a towering pedestal, atop which rested a strange artifact, a crystalline sphere pulsating with a rhythmic, otherworldly glow. The same distress signal they had followed emanated strongly from it, growing louder as they approached. "It's beautiful," Zenara murmured, stepping closer despite Rook's warning glare. "Don't touch it." Lyra barked sharply, but it was too late. Tessa, drawn by instinct, or perhaps curiosity, reached out and touched the sphere. Instantly, the entire ship shuddered violently. Lights flared brightly, blinding them momentarily, and a deep hum resonated through the walls. Then came the voice, a chilling, disembodied whisper that seemed to echo directly inside their minds. "Warning, Reckoners approach." The words repeated over and over, each iteration growing louder and more urgent. Panic surged through the group as the ship began to lock down around them. Doors slammed shut, trapping them in the chamber. The artifact's glow intensified, bathing them in harsh, cold light. "What did you do?" Rook shouted at Tessa, his voice tinged with anger and fear. I didn't mean to," she stammered, backing away from the sphere. Her hands trembled as she clutched Echo's portable interface. It just reacted. Before anyone could respond, the walls began to shift again. But this time, they weren't alone. Shadowy figures materialized around them, their forms indistinct yet menacing. They radiated power and authority, their glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. "Who are you?" Lyra demanded, raising her weapon defensively. Her voice wavered but held firm. There was no verbal reply, only another wave of mental whispers, colder and sharper than before. "You have awakened the Reckoners." And then everything went black. When Cal opened his eyes, the first thing he noticed was the silence. It wasn't the comforting kind, the absence of noise that came with calm, but a suffocating void, as if even sound itself had been stripped away. His head throbbed, and his vision blurred as he tried to sit up. Around him, The rest of the crew lay scattered on the floor, groaning softly as they regained consciousness. "Everyone okay?" Lyra's voice cut through the haze, sharp and commanding despite her obvious disorientation. She pushed herself to her feet, brushing debris from her uniform. One by one, the others followed suit, though Rook winced noticeably, clutching his side where a piece of fallen paneling had struck him during whatever had happened in the chamber. "We're not dead," Tessa said weakly, glancing around nervously. Her hands hovered protectively over Echo's interface, which now emitted only faint, erratic flickers of light. "That's something, right?" Cale stood slowly, his gaze darting toward the artifact, or rather, where it had been. The crystalline sphere was gone, leaving behind an empty pedestal. Whatever force had taken them wasn't done yet. Before anyone could speak further, the ground beneath their feet trembled violently. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, growing louder until it felt like the entire ship might collapse. Then, without warning, everything stopped. The walls shimmered, dissolving into translucent membranes before vanishing entirely. They weren't inside the derelict alien vessel anymore. Instead, they found themselves standing on what looked like the deck of another ship, a colossal, living construct unlike anything humanity had ever imagined. The surfaces pulsed rhythmically, glowing with veins of blue energy that seemed to breathe with life. Gravity fluctuated slightly, making each step feel heavier or lighter than expected. Above them stretched a vast ceiling dotted with bioluminescent clusters, casting shifting patterns of light across the room. "What is this place?" Zinara whispered, her scientific curiosity battling her rising fear. She reached out tentatively to touch a nearby wall, pulling back quickly when it rippled under her fingers. "It's alive," Cale murmured, staring wide-eyed at their surroundings. "This whole ship, it's alive." Their wonder was short-lived. From the shadows emerged towering figures, tall, imposing beings clad in armor that appeared both organic and metallic. Their faces were obscured by sleek helmets, but their glowing eyes pierced through the dimness, locking onto the humans with unnerving intensity. Energy weapons hummed softly at their sides, ready to strike. "Reckoners," Lyra breathed, instinctively stepping in front of the group. Her hand hovered near her weapon, though she knew resistance would be futile against such overwhelming power. The lead figure raised an arm, its movements fluid yet deliberate. At once, a wave of thoughts flooded the crew's minds. Not words exactly, but impressions so vivid they left no room for misunderstanding. "You are trespassers," the voice echoed within them. "You have awakened what should remain dormant. Explain yourselves." Cale stepped forward hesitantly, swallowing hard. "We didn't mean to cause harm. We followed a signal, a plea for help. We thought." "Silence," the being commanded, cutting him off mid-sentence. Its tone carried no anger, only cold indifference. "Your intentions matter little. Your actions will determine your fate." For several tense moments, nothing happened. Then, the Reckoners began moving again, surrounding the group. One of them extended a clawed hand, and a beam of light shot out, enveloping each human in turn. The sensation was invasive, as though unseen tendrils probed every corner of their minds. Memories flashed uncontrollably. Childhood fears, moments of triumph, regrets buried deep. Cale clenched his fists, fighting the urge to scream as the process continued. Finally, the beams retracted, and the Reckoners exchanged silent glances among themselves. "These creatures are primitive," one of them said aloud, its voice resonating like distant thunder. "But there is potential. Potential for destruction, or balance." "And what does that mean for us?" Lyra asked sharply, refusing to let fear dictate her tone. The leader turned its gaze toward her, tilting its head slightly. "It means you will face judgment. If you prove worthy, you may live. If not." It paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. "You will join the countless others who failed." With that, the Reckoners gestured, and the floor beneath them dissolved once more. This time, they landed in a circular arena bathed in pale light. Around them loomed hundreds of massive ships, decloaking silently from the void. The sight was breathtaking and terrifying. "The ultimate death fleet," Zenara whispered, her voice trembling. "They're testing us. And failing isn't an option," Kale added grimly, tightening his grip on his toolkit. For all they knew, this was the beginning of the end, or perhaps, just maybe, the start of something greater. The circular arena was unlike anything the crew had ever seen. Its walls shimmered with an iridescent glow, shifting colors as though alive. The air felt thick, charged with energy that prickled against their skin. Above them, the massive ships of the Reckoners loomed ominously, their glowing hulls casting faint shadows over the group. Each vessel seemed to pulse in unison, as if they were part of a single vast organism. Kale glanced at his companions, noting the mix of fear and determination etched on their faces. Lyra stood tall, her jaw clenched, while Rook gripped his weapon tightly, scanning for threats. Zenara's wide eyes darted around, trying to make sense of the alien environment, and Tessa clutched Echo's interface close, muttering reassurances to herself under her breath. Before anyone could speak, one of the towering Reckoners stepped forward. Its armor gleamed faintly, and its glowing eyes locked onto the humans with unsettling intensity. "You have been brought here to prove your worth," it intoned, its voice resonating deep within their minds rather than through sound alone. "Your species teeters on the edge of chaos and creation, a fragile balance we are tasked to maintain. You will undergo trials to determine whether you deserve survival or extinction." "Trials?" Kale asked, stepping forward cautiously. His voice wavered but held steady. "What kind of trials?" The being tilted its head slightly, as if considering how best to explain. "You will face tests of courage, intellect, and unity. These trials will reveal your true nature, whether you are capable of coexisting peacefully or destined to bring ruin upon yourselves and others." Lyra raised a hand, cutting off any further questions from the group. "And if we pass?" A pause followed, heavy with implication. Then the Reckoner replied, "If you succeed, you may earn our trust, and perhaps even aid. Fail, and you will be erased, your existence deemed too dangerous to endure." The weight of those words settled over the crew like a suffocating blanket. None of them spoke for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Lyra turned to face the group, her expression grim but resolute. "We don't have a choice," she said firmly. "We've come this far. We can't give up now. Whatever these trials are, we'll face them together." Her words bolstered the others, if only slightly. Even Rook nodded gruffly, though his usual scowl remained firmly in place. "Just tell us what we need to do," he growled, addressing the Reckoner directly. The towering figure gestured toward the center of the arena, where a shimmering portal began to form. It swirled with hues of blue and silver, pulsating rhythmically like a heartbeat. "Step through, and the first trial will begin." Without hesitation, Kale moved toward the portal, motioning for the others to follow. One by one, they crossed the threshold, leaving behind the eerie expanse of the arena for something entirely different. They emerged into what appeared to be a dreamscape, a surreal landscape filled with towering spires made of glass-like material that refracted light into dazzling patterns. The sky above was a swirling vortex of colors, neither day nor night. But before they could take in their surroundings, the ground beneath them shifted violently. Suddenly, shadowy figures materialized around them, not physical beings, but manifestations of their deepest fears. For Kale, it was the memory of losing his family during the colony's early days, their faces distorted in pain as he watched helplessly. For Lyra, it was the guilt of abandoning Earth, leaving billions behind to struggle while she sought refuge among the stars. Rook saw visions of battles long past, comrades falling around him as explosions lit up the battlefield. Zenara confronted her lifelong fear of failure, seeing herself unable to save lives despite her knowledge. And Tessa faced the loss of Echo, her creation crumbling into fragments before her eyes. "These aren't real." Lara shouted, breaking through the illusion momentarily. "They're testing us, to see if we can overcome our fears." Her words snapped the others back to reality, forcing them to confront their nightmares head-on. Slowly, painfully, they pushed through the mental barriers erected by the trial. When the last shadow faded, the dreamlike world dissolved, leaving them standing once again in the arena, but noticeably changed. "You have faced your inner demons," the Reckoner declared, its tone unreadable. "Now comes the next test. Prove that you can fight as one." With that, the second trial began, a holographic simulation pitting them against legendary warriors from across the galaxy. Their teamwork would soon be put to the ultimate test. The holographic warriors materialized around the crew in an instant, their forms shimmering with lifelike detail. Each figure radiated power and menace, some towering giants clad in gleaming armor, others lithe and agile with weapons that crackled with energy. The arena shifted again, transforming into a sprawling battlefield filled with jagged rocks, fiery pits, and shifting terrain. It was as if the Reckoners had crafted a microcosm of war itself. Kale tightened his grip on his toolkit, which he'd hastily converted into a makeshift weapon, a plasma cutter humming faintly with blue light. He glanced at his teammates, each preparing for the fight ahead. Lyra drew her sidearm, her stance steady and commanding. Rook hoisted his rifle, his usual gruff demeanor replaced by razor-sharp focus. Zinara crouched low, analyzing the enemy movements with sharp eyes, while Tessa clutched Echo's interface like a talisman, her AI companion flickering uncertainly but ready to assist. "Stay close." Lyra barked over the roar of the simulated winds whipping through the arena. "We don't know what these things are capable of." No sooner had she spoken than the first warrior lunged forward, a hulking brute wielding a massive axe-like weapon. Its blade crackled with electricity, leaving scorched trails in the ground as it swung wildly. Rook fired a burst from his rifle, the shot striking true, but barely slowing the creature down. Kale darted in, using the plasma cutter to slice through one of its legs. With a deafening roar, the warrior collapsed, dissolving into motes of light, before vanishing completely. "That's how we do it," Kale shouted, adrenaline coursing through him. But there was no time to celebrate. Two more enemies charged simultaneously, forcing the group to split up. Zinara ducked behind a rock formation, her mind racing as she studied their foes. "They're mimicking real species," she called out. "Adapt your tactics based on their weaknesses." Her advice came just in time. One of the holographic warriors, a sleek, insectoid being, leaped toward Tessa, its claws glinting dangerously. Before it could strike, Echo projected a localized EMP pulse, disrupting its movement long enough for Lyra to take it down with precise shots to its vulnerable joints. Meanwhile, Kale found himself face to face with a humanoid warrior wielding twin blades. Every swing forced him to dodge desperately, his heart pounding as he searched for an opening. Finally, spotting a gap in its defenses, he rolled under its guard and jammed the plasma cutter into its chest. The warrior shattered into fragments of light, leaving him breathless but victorious. As the battle raged on, the crew began to work together seamlessly. Rook provided covering fire, pinning down enemies so Lyra could flank them. Zinara used her knowledge of xenobiology to identify weak points, guiding the others' attacks. Even Tessa played a crucial role, using Echo to create barriers or disable enemy weapons temporarily. Their teamwork. The second trial ended with a deafening silence. The holographic warriors dissolved into nothingness, leaving the crew panting and battered but alive. Their teamwork had carried them through, proving they could fight as one. But none of them dared celebrate just yet. The Reckoners stood silently at the edge of the arena, their glowing eyes unreadable as ever. "You have demonstrated strength and unity," the lead Reckoner intoned, its voice resonating in their minds. "Now comes your final test, a puzzle that will determine whether you possess the wisdom to wield power responsibly." With a wave of its hand, the being summoned a massive crystalline structure in the center of the arena. It pulsed faintly with golden light, intricate alien symbols etched across its surface. As the crew approached cautiously, Cale felt an unsettling familiarity. Some of the markings resembled those on the artifact they'd found aboard the derelict ship. "This is part of it," Zinara murmured, her voice tinged with awe and unease. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing against the crystal. Instantly, images flooded her mind. Visions of destruction on a cosmic scale, entire galaxies consumed by darkness. She recoiled sharply, clutching her head. "What did you see?" Lyra asked sharply, stepping closer. "It's not safe," Zinara replied shakily. "This thing, it's tied to something dangerous, something ancient." Before anyone could respond, Rook stepped forward, his expression dark. "We don't know what we're dealing with here. Maybe it's time we stopped trusting these reckoners." His tone carried more venom than usual, his distrust boiling over. "Rook, now isn't the time for paranoia," Lyra snapped, turning to face him. But Rook wasn't finished. "No, then tell me why every step we take leads us deeper into danger." He shot back, gesturing wildly at their surroundings. "First the signal, then the artifact, now this puzzle. It all feels like a setup." Tessa frowned, glancing nervously between them. "He has a point. We've been following breadcrumbs without knowing where they lead. What if solving this puzzle unleashes something worse?" Cale shook his head firmly. "We don't have a choice. If we walk away now, we'll never know what's really going on. And neither will Lizera 7. His words seemed to settle the argument. For now. Reluctantly, the group turned their attention back to the crystal. Tessa activated Echo's interface, hoping the AI could decipher the alien symbols. At first, Echo's responses were slow and fragmented, but then something strange happened. Its voice grew clearer, almost independent. "The artifact holds a failsafe," Echo said suddenly, its tone unusually assertive. "But activating it requires unlocking 3 sequences. Each sequence carries risk." "Risk?" Lyra echoed warily. "What kind of risk?" Before Echo could answer, alarms blared throughout the arena. The walls shimmered violently, and the reckoners stiffened, their weapons rising defensively. From the shadows emerged dozens of smaller drones, clearly hostile, their red eyes locking onto the humans. "We've triggered a security breach," Cale realized, his stomach sinking. He turned accusingly toward Rook, who looked guilty despite his earlier protests. "I was trying to protect us," Rook shouted defensively, raising his rifle. "I tampered with Echo earlier, hoping it would give us answers faster. I didn't think." "You didn't think," Lyra barked, cutting him off. There was no time for blame. The drones surged forward, firing beams of energy that sizzled dangerously close to the crew. "Everyone, fall back," Lyra commanded, taking charge once again. They scrambled behind cover, using the arena's jagged terrain to shield themselves. But the drones were relentless, swarming around them with mechanical precision. Amidst the chaos, Tessa worked frantically with Echo, attempting to stabilize the situation. "If I can access the crystal's core, I might be able to shut down the drones," she called out, dodging blasts as she moved closer to the structure. "Do it fast," Cale yelled, blasting apart 2 drones with his plasma cutter. Beside him, Rook fought fiercely, guilt fueling his determination to make up for his mistake. As Tessa reached the crystal, Echo interfaced directly with it, bypassing the alien systems. For a moment, everything froze. The drones hovered motionless, the reckoners stood rigid, and the arena fell eerily silent. Then, with a surge of golden light, the drones collapsed, their circuits fried. The crew breathed a collective sigh of relief, until the ground beneath them began to tremble. "The artifacts unlocked," Zinara whispered, staring wide-eyed at the glowing crystal. "But I don't think we've saved anything. We may have unleashed something far worse." Above them, the reckoners exchanged silent glances, their expressions unreadable. Whatever had been awakened Humanity's fate hung precariously in the balance. The trembling beneath their feet grew stronger, shaking the arena violently. Cracks began to form in the shimmering walls, and faint whispers, like voices from another dimension, echoed through the air. The reckoners stood motionless, their glowing eyes fixed on the pulsating crystal at the center of the arena. It was clear that whatever had been awakened was beyond their control. Kale turned to Zinara, his voice urgent. "What's happening? You said this thing is dangerous." "It is," Zinara replied, her face pale as she stared at the crystal. "From what I saw earlier, it's tied to something ancient, an entity capable of consuming entire galaxies. If we don't stop it now, we might not get another chance," Lyra finished grimly. She glanced at the lead reckoner, who remained eerily silent. "You brought us here. Tell us how to fix this." The towering being finally spoke, its voice cold and unyielding. "Your interference has destabilized the artifact. The devourer stirs. It cannot be contained for long." "Devourer?" Tessa gasped, clutching Echo tightly. "That's what the visions showed me. An endless void swallowing everything." Rook cursed under his breath, gripping his weapon tighter. "Great, so we've unleashed the galaxy's worst nightmare. Any bright ideas?" Before anyone could respond, one of the reckoners suddenly stepped forward. Not the leader, but a smaller figure whose armor bore subtle differences. Its movements were hesitant, almost rebellious. When it spoke, its voice lacked the icy detachment of the others. "There may still be a way," it said softly, addressing the crew directly, "but you must act quickly." Lyra narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "Who are you? Why should we trust you?" "My name is Syra," the figure replied. "I am part of a faction within the Reckoners who oppose the methods of our kind. We believe destruction is not always the answer, but time is running out." Syra explained hurriedly that the artifact wasn't just a key to unleashing the Devourer. It also held a fail-safe mechanism designed to seal the entity away permanently. However, activating the fail-safe required cooperation and sacrifice. The process would drain immense energy, likely destroying the artifact itself in the process. "And if we fail?" Kale asked, dread creeping into his voice. "The Devourer will break free," Syra admitted, her tone grave. "It will consume this sector of the galaxy first, then move outward. Nothing will stop it." The group exchanged uneasy glances. They had no choice but to trust Syra, if only because the alternative meant certain doom. Lyra nodded decisively. "Tell us what we need to do." Syra led them deeper into the ship, bypassing security systems with ease thanks to her insider knowledge. Along the way, she revealed more about the Reckoner's mission: to maintain cosmic balance by eliminating threats before they grew too powerful. But factions like hers argued that diplomacy and understanding could achieve better results without resorting to annihilation. They reached a hidden chamber where a secondary console hummed faintly, connected to the artifact's core. Syra instructed Tessa and Echo to interface with it while the rest of the team prepared for battle. As soon as they began working, alarms blared again, this time louder and more insistent. "The others know I betrayed them," Syra said grimly. "We won't have much time." Sure enough, moments later, hostile reckoners stormed into the chamber, weapons drawn. Lyra, Kale, and Rook formed a defensive line, holding off waves of attackers while Tessa worked furiously to stabilize the failsafe sequence. Behind them, the glowing crystal pulsed erratically, tendrils of shadowy energy beginning to seep outward. "It's starting," Zinara shouted, backing away from the growing darkness. "The Devourer is breaking through." Tessa's hands flew across Echo's interface, sweat dripping down her face. Almost there, just a few more seconds. As the hostile reckoners closed in, Syra made a bold move. She activated her own weapon, creating a massive energy barrier that trapped the attackers temporarily. "Go," she urged, her voice filled with urgency. "I'll hold them off." But Kale started to protest, but Lyra grabbed his arm. "She's buying us time," Lyra said firmly. "Don't waste it." With a final burst of effort, Tessa completed the sequence. The crystal erupted in a blinding flash of light, sending shockwaves through the chamber. The shadows receded, vanishing entirely as the artifact collapsed inward, sealing the devourer once more. When the dust settled, the crew found themselves alone, except for Syra, battered but alive. Though victorious, the cost weighed heavily on all of them. And as they prepared to return to Lizara 7, Syra vowed to help humanity navigate the dangers ahead. Their journey was far from over. The artifact's collapse left the chamber eerily silent, its once pulsating glow now extinguished. The air felt heavy, as if the very fabric of reality had been stretched and torn before snapping back into place. Syra leaned against a wall, her armor scorched and cracked from the energy barrier she used to hold off her fellow reckoners. Her breathing was labored, but her glowing eyes remained resolute. "We've sealed the devourer," she said quietly, though her tone carried no celebration. "But this victory is temporary. The artifact's destruction weakened the containment field. If the devourer stirs again, we may not be so lucky." Cale stared at the remnants of the crystal, his heart pounding. He could still feel the weight of what they'd unleashed, and narrowly contained. "How long do we have?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Syra hesitated. "Decades, maybe centuries. But time is unpredictable when dealing with entities like the Devourer. We need to prepare for all-out war, if necessary." Lyra stepped forward, her expression grim but determined. "Then let's get moving. This ship isn't safe anymore, and neither are we." As they made their way back toward the Eclipse, the crew passed through corridors littered with debris from the earlier battle. Hostile reckoners lay scattered across the floor, their lifeless forms dissolving into faint motes of light. The sight filled Kel with unease. They'd fought for survival, yes, but seeing the aftermath reminded him of the cost. When they reached the hangar bay, Tessa stopped abruptly, clutching Echo's interface tightly. "Something's wrong," she murmured, her voice trembling. "Echo, it's fading." Cale turned sharply, his stomach sinking as he saw the holographic projection flicker weakly. For weeks, Echo had been more than just an eye. It had become part of the team, offering guidance, humor, and even moments of warmth. Now, it seemed on the verge of disappearing entirely. "I interfaced directly with the artifact," Tessa explained, tears welling up in her eyes. "Echo absorbed some of the energy surge. It saved us, but it's dying." Zenara finished gently, placing a hand on Tessa's shoulder. "I'm sorry." "No," Tessa cried, shaking her head furiously. "There has to be something we can do." Syra stepped closer, studying the flickering projection. "There might be a way," she said cautiously. "Your eye could merge with our systems temporarily, stabilizing its core until repairs can be made. But it would mean leaving your control." Tessa hesitated, torn between fear and desperation. Finally, she nodded. "Do it," she whispered. "Just don't let it disappear." With Syra's help, they transferred Echo's consciousness into one of the Reckoner ship's auxiliary systems. As the process completed, Echo's final words echoed softly in their minds. "Thank you for believing in me." Back aboard the Eclipse, the mood was somber. Each member of the crew carried the weight of what they'd lost, but also the knowledge of what they'd gained. Syra joined them, pledging to guide humanity through the challenges ahead. Together, they plotted a course for Lizara 7, knowing full well that their fight was far from over. The journey back to Lizara 7 was quiet, the kind of silence that follows a storm. The crew sat in the dimly lit cabin of the Eclipse, each lost in their own thoughts. Cale stared out the viewport at the endless expanse of stars, his mind replaying everything they'd endured. The trials, the battles, and the sacrifices. Echo's absence weighed heavily on him. Though it had been an eye, its presence had felt almost human. Tessa sat nearby, her eyes red from crying, clutching the portable interface like a lifeline, even though it was now silent. Lyra stood near the cockpit, her arms crossed as she gazed ahead. Her expression was calm, but there was a weariness in her posture that hadn't been there before. She'd always carried the burden of leadership, but this mission had tested her in ways she couldn't have imagined. Still, she refused to let despair take hold, not when so much depended on their survival. Scifi, meanwhile, remained apart from the group, seated in the corner of the cabin. Her glowing eyes dimmed slightly, betraying her exhaustion. Though she'd saved them all, she knew her actions would come with consequences. The Reckoners wouldn't forgive betrayal easily, and her decision to side with humanity meant she could never return to her people. Yet, she didn't regret it. For the first time in centuries, she felt hope, a fragile, flickering flame, but hope nonetheless. As the eclipse approached Lizera 7, the sight of the colony brought mixed emotions. From orbit, it looked small and vulnerable, clinging to life amidst the barren moon's desolation. But for the settlers below, it was home, a symbol of resilience and determination. When the ship touched down, a crowd gathered outside, their faces etched with worry and anticipation. Captain Lyra stepped off the ramp first, followed by the rest of the crew. Cheers erupted as the colonists realized they were safe, but Lyra raised a hand to quiet them. "We've faced dangers beyond imagining," she began, her voice steady and clear. "And we've returned, not just with answers, but with allies." She gestured toward Scifi, who stepped forward cautiously. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as they took in the alien figure, her armor gleaming faintly under the red sun. Some recoiled in fear, while others stared in awe. Before panic could spread, Zinera stepped beside Scifi, speaking up. "She risked everything to help us," Zinera said firmly. "Without her, none of us would be standing here today." Kale added, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "This isn't just about surviving anymore. It's about building something bigger, something better. We're not alone in this universe. And if we can learn to work together, maybe we can find our place among the stars." The words resonated deeply, sparking a newfound sense of purpose among the settlers. Over the following days, Scifi worked tirelessly to share her knowledge, teaching them about advanced technologies and warning them of the dangers lurking beyond their borders. In return, humanity offered her something she hadn't known in centuries: trust. But the victory came with scars. Tessa spent hours tinkering with Echo's interface, determined to restore even a fragment of its consciousness. Rook withdrew into himself, haunted by guilt over his earlier betrayal, but finding solace in protecting the colony. And Kale. He continued staring at the stars, knowing their journey had only begun. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of orange and violet, Lyra joined Kale outside the communication hub. "What happens next?" he asked softly. "We keep going," she replied, smiling faintly. "That's what hope is, all we've ever had, and all we'll ever need." Far above, the vastness of space stretched endlessly, filled with both peril and promise. Humanity's story among the stars was just beginning. And whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together.